The so-called black budget has never been shown to the public until now.
Since 1996, the Pentagon has spent $8.5 trillion in taxpayer money that has never been accounted for.
The Pentagon works much like the Federal Reserve.
The concept started in the 1940s with something called the Manhattan Project.
And what she basically was told, this office receives the money. We generate false reports back to the president and to Congress. That money then passes out of this office to a black project.
According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
Current estimates clock the Pentagon's missing cash from 8 to 10 trillion, with some sources gauging even higher. To give you some perspective, this slide is equivalent to 100 packets of $10,000, equaling 1 million, and could be stuffed in a grocery bag. This slide shows $100 million and can fit neatly on a standard pallet, with this slide showing $1 billion and the final slide showing 1 trillion. Notice that the pallets of money are double stacked, and then imagine 10 trillion more dollars spread across the slide, and you'll have some idea of the biggest financial oversight in the world. So where did this money go? What is it actually being used for? There are many theories, the first being that every year hundreds of billions of Pentagon dollars go missing, not because of fraud, waste, or abuse, but because US military planners have appropriated it to secretly develop advanced weapons and fund clandestine operations.
A shadowy government with its own Air Force, its own Navy, its own fundraising mechanism, and the ability to pursue its own ideas of the national interest, free from all checks and balances, and free from the law itself.
Senator Daniel Inouye is speaking about the Unacknowledged Special Access Programs, or USAPs, an entity that uses taxpayer dollars, but is not beholden to domestic laws. Unacknowledged Special Access Programs are not to be confused with special access programs that are acknowledged. Edward Snowden, for instance, disclosed, among other things, a program called PRISM, but PRISM was acknowledged, meaning the President, Congress, and key members of the intelligence community knew of its existence. USAPs, on the other hand, are small, top-secret compartments whose very existence is not known by anyone outside the compartment.
It is ironic that the U.S. should be fighting monstrously expensive wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, allegedly to bring democracy to those two countries, when it itself can no longer legitimately claim to be called a democracy, when trillions, and I mean thousands of billions of dollars, have been spent on projects about which both the Congress and the Commander-in-Chief have been kept deliberately in the dark.
In the US, there are 3 types of classification: confidential, secret, and top secret. But just because a person has top secret clearance does not mean this person can gain access to all the different top secret documents of the intelligence agencies. However, this 3-tiered classification system is not enough to protect some of the more sensitive information. Therefore, additional levels of compartmentalization have been created, e.g. USAPs. A Department of Defense manual describes USAP as follows, quote, "Unacknowledged SAPs require a significantly greater degree of protection than acknowledged SAPs. A SAP with protective controls that ensures the existence of the program is not acknowledged, affirmed, or made known to any person not authorized for such information. All aspects, technical, operational, logistical, are handled in an unacknowledged manner." end quote. This means that no matter who it is, high-ranking official or otherwise, if one were to ask about such a program, one is authorized and required to deny its existence entirely.
If you're in a very tight compartment, then you have to sign a statement that you will not divulge the existence of the project or even answer a question that could divulge the existence of the project. It's not even on a need-to-know basis, it's on a basis of people being identified specifically to know what you're working on and directly associated with the project. All you would have to do is visit Russia to see how they did it. They would compartmentalize every project into what I used to call silos, and they would have a colonel or a colonel general sitting on top of that, and literally they could not talk to anyone outside of that silo. And if someone else needed help, one person would be sent over to another place, sit down at a desk, look at a piece of paper, say, yes, I know what that problem is, here's the answer to it, and walk away. He would not even know what it was that he was working on. If you have a covert project, the funding would come through a number of government sources, none of which would be identified to the workers. It's just that you sign a contract with the U.S. government and the funding would show up at the right place at the right time.
And what kind of operations would require such monumental secrecy? The assertion is that for decades, scientists have been reverse engineering certain advanced technologies under the cover of USAPs. Some claim that much of this technology has already been invented, but taken over by black projects, and in some cases preventing patents.
The remarkable works of Canadian inventor John Hutchison has drawn widespread attention from businessmen and government scientists since 1979, when he began using ultra-high electromagnetic frequencies to transform matter in some very unusual ways. It has come to be known as the Hutchison effect.
The objects you're seeing moving there is a form of levitation by translational movement, meaning that the objects become lighter and can float around. The heaviest being the barium cylinder that you see there with the two wires coming out of it.
In this remarkable series of video clips, we see what happens when he fine-tunes the electromagnetic frequencies aimed at target objects in his garage.
What is interesting and also frustrating about his invention is that he's using a combination of Tesla coil and Van de Graaff to produce a very disruptive and lifting experiments, which in one case, for example, actually lifts a 19-pound bushing toward the ceiling just from electromagnetic fields. Now, when we analyze that, we find that there's position versus time graph that we can plot, and also the velocity versus time. But when we actually analyze the acceleration versus time, it's an increasing straight line. So we're forced as scientists to admit that we have a third derivative effect, which, for my mind, actually lends itself to an anomalous new force, which I call hyperforce. Because we have to take a derivative of that to finally get a flat, straight line, a constantly increasing acceleration. So the Hutchison effect has been used as a benchmark for a comparison to many other high voltage propulsion devices.
Many claim that this particular video is genuine, and that it's these kinds of zero-point energy or anti-gravity technologies that are being built in USAPs. But John's infamous Hutchison effect is not scientifically credible, as he has been unable to adequately recreate the effect since 1991. But even beyond that, many claim the videos are entirely fake, because 10 years after his videos surfaced, he was caught blatantly hoaxing one. Notice the string pulling the toy UFO up and down at the left-hand side of the screen. But some claim that this was only a fake because of John's inability to recreate what he actually did in the 80s, pointing to how well documented the original Hutchison effect was by Colonel John Alexander, who funded a 4-month exhaustive study of the effect through Stanford Research Institute and the CIA, where a team of 4 military scientists stayed with John to document his results, and found all of them, as witnessed in the 1980s footage, to be real and unexplainable by conventional physics. 2 of the team members were physicists from Sandia National Labs, who speculated that what he was tapping into was a, quote, torsion field or spin field effect. It's difficult to pin down the truth of John Hutchison, of his palpably odd and eccentric nature, of his supposed experiments, but I'll leave the rest of that inquiry up to you. Some claim that the multiple video, photographic, and radar evidence of anomalous objects performing seemingly impossible maneuvers in the sky are human creations under the cover of USAPs. Could this mean that the 5 to 10% of the UFO sightings that are truly unexplainable, whether they appear like orbs or craft, are from our own military? This is a claim that has been given to me many times. But if the objects we see are man-made and so incredibly sensitive and secretive, why would they fly it around the world all the time? We receive UFO reports from generals in Chile, Greenland, Mexico, Brazil, Sweden, Japan, from pilots and government officials in Italy, Iran, Peru, Australia, Germany, and Canada, with satellite reports from all over the world. Are all of these credentialed officials reporting the same craft designed by us? I do not think so. This is not to say that USAPs aren't creating highly advanced technologies that would astonish a layman observer. It's merely knocking down the warrantless, nearly religious claim from those who refuse to entertain that certain objects can be seen that appear to defy physics, and that these objects might not be terrestrial. What about whistleblowers?
His name is Edward Snowden. He's an American former CIA employee and computer technician. Today he came out as the leaker of classified NSA documents that spell out a secret surveillance program.
But as was said before, we know people in the past have leaked acknowledged programs. But has anyone ever come forward from an unacknowledged program? Because surely if these black projects do exist, anyone would have come forward by now.
The security was unbelievably oppressive. There was a security guard everywhere following you all the time. There was never any free discussion allowed, which is the basis of science.
Recently, Lazar caused a sensation when he revealed that he'd been ordered to investigate the propulsion systems of captured alien spacecraft.
My work involved the back engineering of an extraterrestrial craft, specifically the propulsion and power source. The UFOs are very typical. As far as a typical UFO is, it's two inverted dishes, two inverted pie plates, if you wish, and with a hump on the top. Metallic looking, no wings, no fins, no visible propulsion source. Inside they're very sparse. If you come in the main entryway, you'll see 3 seats, the central reactor and waveguide that goes to the ceiling, the 3 gravity amplifiers surrounding it, and you'll really see just about nothing else.
The authorities immediately denied his claims, and now he says they've tried to erase his identity from all official records. George Knapp is a well-respected investigative reporter with KLAS-TV. He broke the story, including the claim that Lazar worked at Los Alamos in New Mexico, where the atomic bomb was developed.
How did these craft get into the hands of the U.S. government?
I really have no idea how the craft got there. I don't believe there were crashes because the craft weren't damaged. And that's about all that I can say.
How do you know, though, that these were extraterrestrial craft?
First of all, we were back engineering the technology, which means we were taking a finished product and trying to figure out how it was originally designed and developed. Second of all, the technology that we're dealing with doesn't exist.
Did you ever see them fly?
They were frequently tested. They were tested normally on Wednesday nights when the traffic was lowest in the area. I saw one test close up, and several tests at a distance of about 15 miles. It was in Japan.
Back in Las Vegas for a visit, Lazar recalls why he came forward in the first place. He had traveled to the S-4 base only a handful of times, but began to get scared.
I began to get worried in that, boy, they've given me all this classified information. They're not calling me anymore. They won't take my phone calls. And in the meantime, apparently they're deciding what
to do with me.
Look how bright it's getting. Look at it now.
For a variety of personal reasons, Lazar couldn't keep the story to himself. He shared his tale with John Lear and Gene Huff. They and a few others made treks out to the outskirts of S4 because Lazar said he'd learned when the test flights of the saucer would take place. 3 weeks in a row, a glowing object appeared over the mountains.
Look how bright it's getting. Look at it now.
And just a few minutes ago, we saw one of the government extraterrestrial UFOs.
The time when Bob said there would be a test, there was a strange light jumping around in the sky above the location where he said it would be at the time and date he said it would be.
Lazar has more than his share of critics, including the poobahs of the UFO community who think he made it up. And he has holes in his background that have yet to be filled. But to date, no one has yet been able to explain how he knew those test flights would take place out there.
Look, the stuff I saw there was the most unbelievable, literally, because it defied what we knew as physics. And at least I thought it did. And maybe what we knew was a little incorrect.
I'm not going to be scared. I am scared, but I wish I could tell you. Whoa, did you see that? It's gone, man. At 1,000 miles an hour, this thing's booked.
It's useful to be skeptical of Lazar, as many claim he's simply lying, and that Lazar's propulsion system seems plausible to anyone without a physics degree, that he never set foot on Area 51, that his elaborate story was constructed with the same fastidious care he's lavished on his fireworks, jet cars, and other mechanical projects. Others theorize he's participating in government-controlled disinformation put forward to distract the broader population from what's actually occurring in the intelligence agencies. Lazar has always displayed an exceptional respect for detail and consistency, and he has an extraordinary ability to focus his attention on whatever his current project is, to the exclusion of everything else. His only deficiencies, skeptics argue, seem to be moral ones, that is if you consider lies and the exploitation of others to be wrong. Those who doubt Lazar's extraordinary claims positively assert that no matter what his intention, Lazar did not work with flying saucers in an underground hangar near Area 51. He made it all up with his obviously intelligent and dishonest mind, with many pointing to his stated credentials, which failed to check out.
I did a lot of checking on Bob. I tried to meet with him twice. I was supposed to on one occasion, and he didn't go along. I checked at MIT. I checked at Caltech. Neither one ever heard of them.
Defenders of Lazar, however, claim it's not far-fetched to wonder if there was a concerted effort to remove Lazar's existence on paper. These kinds of methods have been used by agencies in the past. And how was it that on Wednesday, March 29th, 1989, Lazar was able to predict the exact flight schedule of the craft in question? This was when Lazar, his wife, and 3 friends drove to the edge of Area 51 to watch and film the test flight.
It is bright right now.
Admittedly, the tape proves very little by itself because with the distance and darkness, there are no reference points other than the alleged flying disc. But Lazar's information about the time and location of the test flights proved correct, not once, but twice.
Thousands of people have been driving to Area 51 for decades attempting to get footage like Lazar did, but none could, and Bob Lazar got the footage on his first try. And when the footage taken by Bob's friend is more closely examined, the object appears in the shape of the craft Lazar has consistently been describing. Did he know the exact place and time the supposed craft would be flying? Because he's telling the truth? What about Lazar's W-2 form, which lists an unacknowledged government department with the correct name, date, state, and an identification number listed as top secret in IRS records, and was validated by District Judge Jack Lehman?
We do have a W-2 form of record that shows that he worked for the United States Department of Naval Intelligence.
And in 1990, during Operation Desert Shield, aviation expert Jim Goodall, who was on active duty in Washington, D.C. with the Minnesota Air National Guard, goes to the Navy's investigative office in the Pentagon to ask about the validity of Lazar's W-2 form.
And I said, I'd like to get verification of where this location is. It's a classified zip code. And the Navy officer said, just a minute, and made a phone call. He said, the Admiral would like to see you. So I go into this Admiral's office, and he said, Sergeant, if you ever come in this office again with something like this, I'll have you court-martialed. Now get out of my office and get out of there now. If his W-2 was phony, why did this admiral have a hissy fit over it?
This dismissive tactic would seem to be appropriate for the denial of an unacknowledged program. If Lazar was lying, how was he the first person to publicly announce Element 115, an element which decades later was placed onto the periodic table?
115 is strictly an extraterrestrial material. It probably occurs naturally in some other places, maybe other star systems. Some people not familiar with science or chemistry say, well, that's ridiculous, all the elements occur on Earth, but that's not true. There are elements on the periodic chart that aren't found on Earth.
But skeptics argue that Lazar's Element 115 prediction does not matter, given that the element does not appear to have the characteristics Lazar claimed. I do not know if Lazar is telling the truth, and it's likely that most USAPs, if indeed using funding from missing trillions, will never see the light of day. But other than the alleged liar, Bob Lazar, several people who worked in USAPs have come forward, detailing their stories in depth, all of whom say truly remarkable and consistent things, and if true, could have powerful implications for all of us. It's up to us to digest and purport this information the best we can, to be skeptical, but not to allow that skepticism to prevent us from having an open mind.
Understand that he willingly agreed to take a lie detector test, requested and independently arranged by a Las Vegas reporter. Terry Tabernetti is the ex-cop who administered the test.
If he's lying, he ought to be in Hollywood, because he gave absolutely no physiological indications of attempting deception.
He never deviated. We covered it several different ways. I asked the same question several different ways, and his answers were always the same. Hooking up, going through the test, then started the emotional roller coaster that I experienced that night. And it's something that I can honestly say has changed my whole outlook on things. About halfway through that test, I'm looking down, and all of a sudden the realization sets in that I'm looking at a probable, truthful result. And I'm getting chills right now talking about it, because that's what I got. On every chart that I did, one relevant question that was the same with every test was the last one. Have you deliberately lied to any question concerning the UFO information you've given me? And his answer of no was indicated as being truthful on the charts. So whatever he told me that night, Bob Lazar truly believes to be the truth.
Whenever she's alone, or that child she dares to flare rising bones, half naked into the air, just to find the spot, the one that makes you weak, to draw more than a queen's lot. By the end of every